The morning rain drummed against the windows of Miller's Diner as Tom sat in his usual corner booth, staring at his half-empty coffee cup. The steam had long stopped rising from the dark liquid, but he didn't seem to notice. His calloused hands, wrapped around the ceramic mug like it was the only thing keeping him grounded to this world. 6 months. That's how long it had been since Linda passed away. 6 long months of waking up to an empty bed, cooking dinner for one, and pretending he was okay when people asked. The truth was, Tom felt like he was drowning in a sea of bills, responsibilities, and loneliness that seemed to have no shore in sight. His construction business, which had once thrived under his careful management, was barely hanging on by a thread. The medical bills from Linda's cancer treatment had eaten through their savings like termites through old wood. Every morning brought new envelopes with red stamps, threatening letters, and phone calls he'd learned to ignore. The mortgage was 3 months behind, and his teenage kids, Amy and Jake, tried their best to pretend they didn't notice their father falling apart. Tom picked at the slice of toast on his plate, the same breakfast he'd ordered every morning for the past 2 weeks. The elderly waitress, Betty, had stopped asking what he wanted. She just brought him coffee and toast, sometimes adding an extra pat of butter without charging for it. Small kindnesses that Tom noticed but couldn't quite bring himself to acknowledge. The diner was nearly empty at this hour. A few truckers sat at the counter, talking about road conditions and delivery schedules. A businessman in a wrinkled suit typed furiously on his laptop while his eggs grew cold. And Tom, sitting alone in his corner, watching the world move forward while he felt stuck in place. That's when he first noticed them through the rain-streaked window. A woman stood near the diner's entrance with 5 children clustered around her like chicks around a hen. The kids ranged in age from what looked like 3 years old to maybe 12. They huddled together under a torn umbrella that did little to keep them dry. Their clothes were clean but worn, the kind of hand-me-downs that had been passed through many hands before finding their current owners. The mother looked to be in her early 30s, but life had drawn lines around her eyes that made her seem older. Her brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she kept smoothing down the youngest child's jacket with nervous, loving gestures. Tom watched as she approached people walking past the diner, speaking quietly with her head slightly bowed. He couldn't hear her words through the glass, but her body language spoke volumes about embarrassment and desperation. Person after person walked past without stopping. Some pretended not to see her. Others shook their heads quickly and hurried away. A few dropped coins into her outstretched hand, but most people seemed to look right through her and her children as if they were invisible. Tom found himself leaning forward, his forgotten breakfast growing cold as he watched this scene unfold. There was something about the way the woman held herself that struck him. Despite her obvious need, she maintained a dignity that reminded him of Linda during her illness. Linda had hated asking for help, even from family. She'd face each day with quiet strength, never wanting to be seen as weak or needy. The oldest child, a girl with pigtails, helped keep the younger ones in line while their mother approached strangers. She whispered instructions to a boy who looked about 7, preventing him from wandering toward the busy street. The little ones looked tired and cold, but they weren't crying or complaining. They just stood there patiently, trusting their mother to take care of them somehow. A businessman in an expensive coat walked toward the diner entrance. The mother approached him with the same quiet desperation Tom had observed with the others. The man didn't even slow down. He pulled out his phone and pretended to take an important call, stepping around the family like they were obstacles in his path. Tom felt anger flare in his chest. Not at the businessman specifically, but at the whole situation, at the unfairness of it all. Here was this woman clearly trying her best to provide for her children, being treated like she was invisible. It reminded him too much of his own struggles, the way people had started avoiding him after Linda's funeral, uncomfortable with his grief and financial problems. The rain was getting heavier now, and the family's inadequate umbrella was losing the battle against the weather. The youngest child, who couldn't have been more than 3, was starting to shiver despite being wrapped in what looked like 2 thin jackets. The mother noticed immediately and pulled the child closer, sharing her own worn coat to provide more warmth. That's when their eyes met through the window. Tom had been watching so intently that when the woman looked toward the diner, their gazes locked for a moment that seemed to stretch forever. He saw exhaustion there and worry, but also a fierce determination to protect her children at any cost. She didn't look away in shame or embarrassment. Instead, she held his gaze with quiet dignity, as if asking not for pity, but for simple human recognition. Something shifted in Tom's chest. Maybe it was seeing his own struggles reflected in a stranger's eyes. Maybe it was remembering how Linda had always insisted they help others when they could, even when they didn't have much themselves. Or maybe it was just the realization that he'd been so focused on his own problems that he'd forgotten there were others fighting battles just as difficult as his own. Without thinking about his empty wallet or overdue bills, Tom raised his hand and gestured toward the diner's entrance. He saw surprise flicker across the woman's face, followed by something that might have been relief. She gathered her children with quiet efficiency, clearly a mother who had learned to move quickly when opportunities presented themselves. Tom watched them approach the diner door, his heart beating faster than it had in months. He couldn't explain why he'd made the gesture. His own situation was precarious enough without taking on someone else's problems. The practical part of his mind was already calculating how much a meal for 6 people would cost. Money he couldn't really afford to spend. But as the family pushed through the diner door, shaking rain from their clothes and looking around uncertainly, Tom realized that for the first time in 6 months he was thinking about someone other than himself. The weight of his own grief and worry was still there, but it had shifted somehow, making room for something else. The mother approached his table cautiously, her children following behind her like a small parade. Up close, Tom could see that, despite their circumstances, the kids were well cared for. Their faces were clean, their hair combed. The oldest girl had her arm protectively around the smallest boy, while the middle children stayed close to their mother's side. "Excuse me," the woman said softly, her voice carrying traces of pride mixed with necessity. "I saw you wave us in. I don't want to bother you, but—" She trailed off, her eyes flicking toward her children and then back to Tom. Tom cleared his throat, suddenly aware that he hadn't spoken to a stranger in weeks. "Please," he said, his voice rougher than he'd expected. "Sit down, all of you." As the family settled into the booth across from him, Tom caught Betty's attention and pointed to the menu. He didn't know what he was doing or why, but for the first time since Linda's death, he felt like he was moving forward instead of just surviving. The silence around the table felt heavy as the family settled into the worn vinyl booth. Tom watched as the mother helped the youngest children out of their damp jackets, her movements careful and practiced. She folded each piece of clothing neatly and placed them in a small pile, even though they were just going to put them back on soon. Betty appeared beside their table with her usual warm smile, pulling out her notepad. "What can I get for you folks today?" she asked, her eyes taking in the scene with the wisdom of someone who'd worked in diners for 30 years and seen every kind of human story. Tom looked at the woman across from him. "Order whatever you'd like," he said quietly. "For all of them." The mother's eyes widened slightly. "That's very kind, but we don't need much. Maybe just some toast and juice for the kids." "Mom, I'm really hungry," whispered the 7-year-old boy, tugging at her sleeve. His stomach made a small growling sound that everyone at the table could hear. The woman's cheeks flushed pink. Tom recognized that look, the same expression Linda used to get when her pride battled with practical need. He leaned forward slightly, keeping his voice gentle. "Look, I eat here every morning and Betty makes the best pancakes in town. The kids should try them." He turned to Betty. "Bring a stack of pancakes for everyone, some scrambled eggs, and whatever juice you have." "Coming right up," Betty said, with a knowing nod already writing on her pad. As Betty walked away, the woman looked down at her hands folded on the table. "I'm Lisa," she said finally. "And this is Katie, Michael, Danny, Jessica, and little Bobby." She pointed to each child as she said their names. The oldest girl, Katie, looked about 12 and had the same tired eyes as her mother. The boys were somewhere in the middle, and Jessica couldn't have been more than 4. "I'm Tom," he replied. "And you don't need to explain anything to me." But Lisa seemed to need to talk. Maybe it was the kindness of a stranger, Or maybe she'd been holding her story inside for too long. "We've been having a rough time lately," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost my job 3 weeks ago. The place where I worked had to close down." Tom nodded, encouraging her to continue without saying anything. "I worked at a small medical clinic as a nurse's aide," Lisa went on. "Nothing fancy, just helping patients, taking their information, basic stuff. But the doctor who owned it retired suddenly and they couldn't find anyone to take over the practice. Just like that, 12 people lost their jobs." The food arrived faster than usual, and Tom suspected Betty had put their order at the front of the line. The kids' eyes grew wide at the sight of the golden pancakes stacked high on their plates. Little Bobby clapped his hands together, making everyone smile for the first time since they'd sat down. "What do we say?" Lisa prompted gently. "Thank you," all 5 children said in unison, their voices sincere and sweet. Tom felt something twist in his chest. When was the last time someone had thanked him for anything? His own kids barely looked up from their phones when he made dinner these days. As the children began eating, Lisa continued her story between helping Jessica cut her pancakes and making sure Bobby didn't spill his juice. "I've been looking for work every day, but it's harder than I thought it would be. Most places want you to have an address, a phone number they can reach you at consistently, clean clothes for interviews. Basic things that are harder to manage when you're living in your car." Tom nearly choked on his coffee. "You're living in your car?" Lisa nodded, not meeting his eyes. 3 weeks now. We were renting a small apartment, but when I lost my job, I couldn't make the rent. The landlord was understanding for a while, but he had bills too. We packed what we could fit in the car and, well, we've been managing." "Where do you sleep?" Tom asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "There's a 24-hour laundromat about 10 miles from here. They don't mind if we stay in the parking lot overnight. The kids sleep in the back seat and I keep watch in the front. We use the bathroom there, and sometimes I can afford to wash our clothes." Katie, the oldest daughter, looked up from her pancakes. She had syrup on her chin, but her expression was serious beyond her years. "Mom lets me help with the little ones while she looks for jobs during the day. We go to the library because it's warm, and they have books and sometimes activities for kids." Tom was amazed by the matter-of-fact way Katie spoke about their situation. No self-pity, no complaints. Just a kid who'd learned to be responsible, because circumstances demanded it. "The library is good," Michael added, speaking around a mouthful of eggs. "They have computers too, so Mom can look for jobs online and fill out applications." "And story time," little Jessica chimed in, bouncing slightly in her seat. "The nice lady reads us books about princesses and dragons." Lisa smiled at her daughter, and for a moment Tom saw past the exhaustion and worry to the woman she must have been before life became so difficult. "The librarians have been wonderful. They let the kids stay while I go to interviews when I can get them." "How many interviews have you had?" Tom asked. 4 in the past 2 weeks. 2 for cleaning jobs, 1 at a grocery store and 1 at another medical clinic. Lisa's shoulders sagged slightly. "The problem is, I don't have a permanent address to put on applications, and it's hard to keep clean clothes for interviews when you're living out of a car. Plus, I need to find something that pays enough to afford first month's rent and a security deposit somewhere." Tom understood that struggle more than she knew. After Linda's medical bills, he'd learned exactly how expensive it was to be poor. Late fees, higher interest rates, deposits for everything. It all added up to make climbing out of a hole nearly impossible. "What kind of work did you do before the clinic?" he asked. "I've been in healthcare for almost 10 years. Started as a nurse's aide right out of high school, then worked my way up. I was actually going to school part-time to become a registered nurse, but when my ex-husband left 2 years ago, I had to drop out to work more hours." There was a story there, Tom could tell, but he didn't push. Everyone had their private battles. Bobby had finished his pancakes and was getting restless. Katie automatically reached over to keep him entertained, making silly faces that made him giggle. The sound was pure joy, untainted by their circumstances. "You're good with them," Tom observed, watching Katie interact with her siblings. Lisa's face softened as she looked at her children. "They're amazing kids. They never complain even when things are scary or uncertain. Katie helps me so much with the younger ones. Sometimes I think she's more mature than I am. Kids are tougher than we think, Tom said, thinking about his own Amy and Jake. But they shouldn't have to be this tough. No, Lisa agreed quietly. They shouldn't. The diner had filled up with the lunch crowd, and Tom realized they'd been talking for over an hour. None of the children had asked to leave or gotten restless. They seemed content just to be warm and fed, playing quiet games with each other while the adults talked. Tom found himself not wanting this conversation to end. For the first time in months, he was thinking about someone else's problems instead of drowning in his own. And strangely, it felt like relief. Tom stared at the empty plates on the table, realizing he'd made a decision without fully thinking it through. The rain outside hadn't stopped, and he could see Lisa glancing toward the window with worry in her eyes. The thought of this family, going back to their car in this weather, made his stomach turn. "Listen," he said suddenly, surprising himself with his own words. "Why don't you all come to my house for a bit? You could get properly dried off, maybe do some laundry." Lisa's eyes widened in shock. "Oh no, we couldn't impose like that. You've already done so much." "It's not an imposition," Tom insisted, though part of his mind was screaming at him to think about what he was doing. "I have a washing machine that's not being used much these days, and my kids are at school until 3. You could have some quiet time, maybe use my computer to look for more jobs." The children looked at their mother hopefully. Little Bobby had fallen asleep against Katie's shoulder, and Jessica was fighting to keep her eyes open. The warm food and safe environment had finally allowed them to relax enough to feel how tired they really were. "Please, Mom," Katie whispered. "Just for a little while?" Lisa looked around the table at her exhausted children, then back at Tom. "Are you sure? I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Tom said firmly. "Trust me on that." 20 minutes later, they were all piled into Tom's pickup truck. The kids squeezed together in the back seat while Lisa sat up front, giving him directions to where they'd left their car so she could follow him home. When they reached the parking lot behind the laundromat, Tom's heart sank at the sight of their vehicle. It was an old sedan, probably 15 years old, with a dent in the passenger door and duct tape holding one of the windows together. The back seat was packed with garbage bags full of clothes, and blankets were draped over the windows for privacy. This was home for a family of 6. "We'll just grab a few things," Lisa said quietly, clearly embarrassed by the state of their living situation. Tom helped her gather some clothes that needed washing while the kids transferred to his truck. He noticed how organized everything was despite the cramped conditions. Lisa had made the best of an impossible situation, keeping her family together and safe even when they had nowhere else to go. His house felt different with 6 extra people in it. Suddenly, the quiet rooms that had felt so empty since Linda's death were full of voices and movement. The kids were polite but curious, looking around at the family photos on the walls and the comfortable furniture they hadn't seen in weeks. "Your house is really nice," Katie said softly, running her hand along the back of the couch. "It needs work," Tom replied, seeing his home through their eyes. He'd let things slide since Linda got sick. There were repairs he hadn't made, rooms he'd stopped using because they held too many memories. While Lisa started a load of laundry, Tom set up his laptop on the kitchen table. "Feel free to use this for job searching," he offered. "The internet password is written on that sticky note there." As Lisa began typing, Tom found himself watching her work. She navigated the computer easily, opening multiple job search websites, and typing quickly. Her resume was already saved in a folder labeled Job Hunt 2025, and he could see dozens of applications she'd submitted. "Can I see your resume?" he asked. "Maybe I can help you think of other places to apply." Lisa hesitated for a moment, then turned the screen toward him. Tom began reading, expecting to see the basic qualifications of a nurse's aide. But as his eyes moved down the page, his expression changed completely. "Wait a minute," he said, leaning closer to the screen. "This says you have a Bachelor of Science in Nursing." Lisa nodded uncomfortably. "Yes, but I haven't worked as a registered nurse in a while." Tom kept reading, his amazement growing with each line. "You have certifications in pediatric care, emergency medicine, and patient education. You worked at St. Mary's Hospital for 3 years as a registered nurse. Lisa, you're not a nurse's aide. You're a fully qualified RN. It's complicated, Lisa said, closing the laptop slightly. How is it complicated? These are serious qualifications. You could be working at any hospital in the city. Lisa was quiet for a long moment, watching her children play in the living room. Bobby was building something with blocks Tom's kids had, left out years ago, while the older ones looked through books from the bookshelf. When I got divorced 2 years ago, my ex-husband left me with a lot of debt, she said finally. He had gambling problems that I didn't know about until it was too late. Credit card debt, loans he'd taken out using our house as collateral. I lost everything. The house, my savings, even my car. I had to file for bankruptcy. Tom listened, without interrupting, beginning to understand. I was so ashamed, Lisa continued. Here I was, a registered nurse who was supposed to have her life together, and I couldn't even keep a roof over my children's heads. I took the job at the clinic because they were willing to hire me quickly, and the pay was enough to rent that little apartment. I was too embarrassed to apply for RN positions, thinking they'd see my financial situation and judge me as unreliable. But your nursing license is still active? Yes, I keep up with all the continuing education requirements. I've been maintaining it, hoping that someday I could go back to hospital work when things got better. Tom shook his head in disbelief. Lisa, you're exactly what my sister has been looking for. Your sister? Rachel runs a pediatric clinic across town. She's been trying to hire a qualified pediatric nurse for months. She's complained to me at least a dozen times about how hard it is to find someone with the right experience and certifications. Lisa's eyes widened. Really? She specializes in treating kids with special needs and chronic conditions. The pay is good, and she offers health insurance, paid time off, all the benefits. She's been interviewing people for weeks but can't find anyone with your qualifications. But what about my situation? Living in a car, no permanent address. That's temporary, Tom said firmly. Rachel cares about finding the right person for her patients, not someone's current housing situation. She'd probably help you figure out the housing part if you're the right fit for the job. Lisa sat back in her chair, looking overwhelmed. I can't believe this. When I woke up this morning in that parking lot, I never imagined. Can I call her? Tom asked. Just to see if she'd be interested in talking to you? Right now? Why not? She's probably at the clinic, and I know she's desperate to fill this position. Lisa looked toward the living room where her children were playing peacefully for the first time in weeks. Katie was reading a story to the younger ones, and they were all clean and warm and fed. Okay, she said quietly. You can call her. Tom pulled out his phone and dialed Rachel's number. As it rang, he looked at Lisa and realized something incredible was happening. This morning, he'd thought he was helping a struggling family by buying them breakfast. Now he was discovering that this woman might be the answer to problems he didn't even know he could help solve. Rachel? It's Tom. I think I found your pediatric nurse. The phone rang 3 times before Rachel picked up. Tom could hear the familiar sounds of a busy medical clinic in the background, children's voices, phones ringing, the general hustle of a healthcare facility. Tom? This is a surprise. Is everything okay? Rachel's voice carried the concern that had become automatic whenever family members called unexpectedly since Linda's death. Everything's fine. Actually, better than fine. Rachel, are you still looking for that pediatric nurse? Are you kidding me? I'm going crazy trying to find someone qualified. I had another interview yesterday with someone who seemed perfect on paper, but she had no real experience with special needs kids. Why? Please tell me you found someone. Tom looked at Lisa, who was listening intently to his side of the conversation. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and he could see the hope and fear battling in her expression. I did find someone. Her name is Lisa, and she has exactly the qualifications you're looking for. Bachelor's degree in nursing, 3 years of hospital experience, and specialized certifications in pediatric care. Where has she been working recently? That's complicated. Can you meet with her today? I think you should hear her story in person. There was a pause. Rachel knew her brother well enough to trust his judgment, especially when it came to people. Tom had always been a good judge of character. I can squeeze in an interview at 4 o'clock if she can get here by then. But Tom, you know I can't hire someone just because you recommend them. This position is too important. I understand. Just meet with her. I think you'll be impressed. After hanging up, Tom turned to Lisa with a smile. 4 o'clock, she wants to meet you. Lisa's face went pale. 4 o'clock today? But I don't have... look at me. I can't go to an interview looking like this. Tom glanced at her clothes, which were clean but obviously worn and wrinkled from being packed in garbage bags. What size do you wear? Linda's clothes are still in the closet upstairs. She was about your size. I couldn't wear your wife's clothes, Lisa said immediately. That wouldn't be right. Linda would have wanted you to have them, Tom said quietly. She was always helping people. It would make her happy to know her clothes were being put to good use. An hour later, Lisa stood in front of the bathroom mirror wearing a navy blue blouse and gray slacks that fit her perfectly. Linda's clothes made her look professional and confident, like the registered nurse she had always been inside. The kids were settled in the living room, and Tom had called his own children to let them know there would be guests when they got home from school. Amy and Jake had sounded curious, but not bothered by the news. You look perfect, Tom said when Lisa came downstairs. Rachel's clinic is only 15 minutes away. I'll drive you there and bring you back afterward. What about the kids? They'll be fine here. Katie seems very responsible, and my kids will be home in an hour anyway. During the drive to the clinic, Lisa was quiet, clearly nervous about the interview. Tom tried to encourage her without putting more pressure on her. Just be yourself, he said. Tell Rachel about your experience and why you love working with children. Don't worry about explaining your current situation unless she asks. What if she does ask? Then you tell her the truth. Rachel's a good person. She'll understand that sometimes life knocks you down and it doesn't mean you're not good at your job. The pediatric clinic was busy when they arrived. Children of various ages filled the waiting room with their parents, and Tom could see why Rachel needed help. The staff looked overwhelmed, and there was clearly more work than they could handle efficiently. Rachel appeared from a back office, looking frazzled but professional. She was 3 years younger than Tom, with the same kind eyes and determined jaw that ran in their family. Lisa, she asked, extending her hand. I'm Rachel. Thank you for coming on such short notice. The interview lasted over an hour. Tom waited in the lobby, watching the organized chaos of the clinic and thinking about how much Lisa's skills were needed here. Through the office window, he could see Rachel and Lisa deep in conversation, both women leaning forward with interest. When they finally emerged, Rachel looked excited and Lisa looked cautiously hopeful. Tom, can I speak with you privately for a moment? Rachel asked. They stepped into an empty examination room while Lisa waited in the lobby. Where did you find her? Rachel asked immediately. She's exactly what I've been looking for. Her experience is perfect, her certifications are current, and she clearly loves working with children. I offered her the job. She said yes? She said yes, but then she broke down crying and told me about her living situation. Tom, she's been living in her car with 5 children. How did you even meet her? Tom told Rachel the whole story, from seeing Lisa outside the diner that morning to discovering her qualifications on his computer. Rachel listened with growing amazement. So you helped her and now she's going to help solve my staffing problems, Rachel said. But Tom, we need to help her get stable housing. I can't have my new pediatric nurse living in a car. I was thinking the same thing. Do you know anyone with a rental property? Actually, yes. Dr. Martinez, who refers patients to us, has a small house he rents out. The tenant just moved out last week, and he's been looking for a responsible family. It's got 3 bedrooms and it's in a good school district. They walked back to the lobby where Lisa was sitting quietly, still looking overwhelmed by the day's events. Lisa, Rachel said, sitting down beside her. I want to help you get settled. I know a landlord who has a house available, and I'm willing to help with the security deposit and first month's rent as a signing bonus. You can pay me back over time from your salary. Lisa stared at them both. I don't understand. This morning I was begging for food money, And now you're offering me a job and a place to live. Sometimes that's how life works, Tom said. When the right people meet at the right time, everything can change quickly. But Rachel wasn't finished. Lisa, I need to ask you something. Tom mentioned you have experience, but we're going to be expanding the clinic next year. I need someone who can eventually help manage other nurses and maybe take on more administrative responsibilities. Would that interest you? Yes, absolutely. I was actually working on my master's degree in nursing administration before everything fell apart. Perfect. The expansion is going to require some construction work. Tom, didn't you say you own a construction company? Tom felt his breath catch. His struggling business had been weighing on his mind all day. Another problem he'd been trying not to think about. I do, but honestly, business has been slow lately. Well, it's about to get busier, Rachel said with a grin. I need someone reliable for the expansion project. Someone I trust. Interested? Tom looked at Lisa, who was smiling through tears. In one morning, they had both gone from struggling alone to finding exactly what they needed in each other. Very interested, Tom said. As they drove back to collect the children, Lisa was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. Tom, I want you to know something. When I woke up this morning, I prayed for help. I didn't know what form it would take, but I asked for a way to provide for my children. I never imagined the help would come through helping someone else too. Tom thought about that as they pulled into his driveway, where he could see all 7 children playing together in his backyard, his 2 and her 5, already becoming friends. Maybe that was how the best help always worked. Not one person rescuing another, but people rescuing each other. 3 months later, Tom sat in the same corner booth at Miller's Diner, but everything else had changed. The weight that had pressed down on his shoulders for so long was gone, replaced by something he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope for the future. Betty approached with a smile, carrying a coffee pot and wearing the same uniform she'd worn for years, but even she looked different somehow. Brighter. The usual? She asked, though she already knew the answer would be different today. Actually, I'm waiting for some friends, Tom said, checking his watch. Better make it a table for 8. Betty's eyebrows raised. 8? My, how things have changed around here. She wasn't wrong. The diner had become a weekly meeting place for 2 families who had found each other in the most unexpected way. Every Saturday morning, they gathered here to share breakfast and catch up on their week. It had become a tradition that none of you all them wanted to break. The door chimed as Lisa entered with her 5 children, but these weren't the same scared, hungry kids who had huddled outside in the rain 3 months ago. Bobby ran ahead to Tom's table with a drawing clutched in his small hands, while Jessica skipped behind him wearing a bright yellow dress that actually fit properly. Tom, look what I made, Bobby announced, climbing onto the bench beside him and spreading out a crayon drawing of what appeared to be 2 houses with stick figures standing between them. That's us, Katie explained, sliding in across from them. Bobby drew our house and your house and all of us in the middle. Tom studied the drawing seriously, the way adults should when children share their art. This is excellent work, Bobby. I can see everyone here. Is that Jessica with the yellow dress? Bobby nodded enthusiastically. And that's Mom in her nurse clothes and Katie with her books and Michael and Danny playing soccer. Lisa sat down next to her youngest son, looking tired but content. Her nursing uniform was crisp and professional, and she wore it with the confidence of someone who had found her place in the world again. Long shift yesterday? Tom asked. 12 hours, but I love it, Lisa replied. We had a little girl come in who reminded me so much of Jessica at that age. She was scared of getting her shots, so I let her listen to my stethoscope first and showed her how to be a brave patient. By the end, she was asking if she could be a nurse when she grows up. The door opened again and Tom's teenagers, Amy and Jake, walked in together. At 17 and 15, they'd initially been skeptical about their father's new friendship with a family of strangers. But over the past 3 months, they'd discovered something neither had expected: younger siblings who looked up to them. Sorry, we're late, Amy said, squeezing in beside Katie. Jake had to finish his science project. I was helping him, Katie added proudly. At 12, she'd become Amy's shadow, soaking up everything the older girl taught her about school, friends, and growing up. Jake sat across from the boys, immediately launching into a conversation about the soccer game they'd played in Tom's backyard the day before. Michael and Danny hung on his every word, treating him like the big brother they'd never had. Betty appeared with her notepad, but she'd long since stopped asking what everyone wanted. She knew their orders by heart now. The usual for everyone? She asked with a knowing smile. Actually, Tom said, looking around the table at the faces that had become so important to him, today's special. We're celebrating. Celebrating what? Jessica asked, bouncing slightly in her seat. Tom pulled out his phone and showed them a photo he'd taken that morning. It was a picture of a large sign being installed in front of a construction site. Martinez Construction, Clinic Expansion. Project, scheduled completion, December 2025. The expansion officially started this week, Tom announced. Which means Martinez Construction is officially back in business. The children cheered, though the younger ones didn't fully understand what it meant. Katie, however, understood perfectly. She'd spent enough time at Tom's house to know how worried he'd been about his business, how the bills had piled up after his wife died. Does this mean you won't have to sell your house? She asked quietly. Tom's throat tightened. He'd never told the kids directly about his financial troubles, but Katie was observant. She'd probably overheard conversations, noticed things that adults thought children missed. No, sweetheart. I won't have to sell the house. In fact, I'm thinking about fixing it up properly. Maybe adding a deck in the backyard where all you kids can play. Can we help? Michael asked. I'm good with tools. Me too, Danny added, not wanting to be left out. Tom laughed. I'll definitely need some assistance. Lisa watched the interaction with tears in her eyes. Her children had changed so much over the past 3 months. They'd gone from being quiet and careful, afraid to ask for anything, to being normal kids again. Kids who felt safe enough to make plans and ask questions and think about the future. The food arrived, and as they ate, the conversation flowed naturally between school stories, work updates, and weekend plans. Tom marveled at how normal it all felt, how this group of 9 people from 2 different families had become something new together. Lisa, Amy said between bites of pancakes, are you still planning to start those nursing classes? Starting next month, Lisa replied. Rachel's been amazing about adjusting my schedule so I can take evening classes for my master's degree. She says the clinic will need a nurse manager once the expansion is complete. That's so cool, Amy said. I've been thinking about nursing too, maybe pediatric nursing like you. Tom caught Lisa's eye across the table. Amy had been struggling since her mother's death, unsure about her future and angry at the world. Watching Lisa rebuild her life and career had given Amy something to focus on besides her grief. I could help you research programs, Lisa offered, and you could volunteer at the clinic sometimes if you want to see what it's really like. Jake looked up from his conversation with the boys. Dad, remember when you used to talk about starting that scholarship thing for Mom? Tom nodded. Linda had always wanted to help families going through medical crises, having experienced firsthand how quickly medical bills could destroy a family's stability. I've been thinking about that again, Tom said. Now that the business is stable, I want to start the Linda Martinez Foundation, help families who are dealing with medical expenses and job loss. Can we help? Katie asked immediately. Of course. I'll need people to help me figure out how to identify families who need assistance. Bobby, who had been quietly coloring on his napkin, looked up suddenly. Like we needed assistance? Exactly like that, buddy. Little Jessica clapped her hands together. So we can help other families like Tom helped us. Tom felt that familiar tightness in his throat. Out of the mouths of babes. That's exactly right, Jessica. As they finished breakfast, Tom looked around. The table one more time. 3 months ago, he'd been a broken man eating alone, drowning in grief and debt and loneliness. Today, he was surrounded by people who had become family, planning projects that would help others the way they'd helped each other. Lisa must have been thinking something similar because she raised her coffee cup in the air. "I want to make a toast," she said, "to unexpected meetings and second chances." Everyone raised their glasses, coffee cups and juice cups and milk glasses. "To finding each other when we needed it most," Tom added. "To family," Amy said softly, looking around the table. "To family," they all repeated. Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds that had been gathering, sending bright beams of light through the diner windows. Tom smiled, thinking about Linda and how proud she would be of the man he'd become again, the family he'd found, and the help he was now able to give to others. Sometimes the people you think you're rescuing end up rescuing you right back. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you all rescue each other.